Chapter 1. Writing and Editing Your Book. Writing. Writing a book is a lot different than writing an article or blog post. It takes time, revising, editing, and determination to finish a project of such size, especially depending on what kind of book you're working on. If you're working on some sort of epic novel or lengthy manuscript, then you're probably someone who writes on a regular basis. If you're working on a poetry book, the same can be said. If you're a public speaker in sales, or an expert in another field or industry, then writing may not be your best skill, which is another reason why I'm putting this book together. It amazes me how often I come across websites online that contain written content that makes zero sense at best. The sentence structure is poor, the content is riddled with spelling and grammatical errors, and it becomes very difficult for people to read. What's worse is that if the potential customer or client is reading through the website expecting high-quality writing, they are likely to turn away because they can't work their way through the content without noticing a slew of mistakes. That's what tends to happen to me. I go to a website that is supposed to be a professional business site and am immediately thrown off by the lack of language skills displayed in the content. It's like seeing a billboard with a proud 90-foot-tall misspelling or grammatical error. So how do you make sure that you're writing something that won't flop? The truth is, you just can't. All you really can do is write good quality work that is useful and/or entertaining to your reader and develop good marketing skills. The writing process can be very enjoyable whether you plan for it or not. If you're writing about an expert topic and you want your book to outline something specific or instruct people how to do something, it's a good idea to make an outline of the main points and write according to a plan. This will make it easier to stay focused than if you just set out to write every day without a plan of action or a focused topic. Your writing will be all over the place, and readers can potentially get lost. The same can be said for a work of fiction with a complex plot line or a number of subplots. You want your reader to move seamlessly from one page to the next, not sporadically be presented with information. Now that we've covered why an outline is important, let's discuss how you can create a workable outline. I think of an outline as a projected table of contents. What do you want the book to contain? How can you organize this information in a way that flows and is easy to flow? Let's say that there are 4 major parts to your book. I would put those 4 categories as the main categories. So if you have a hierarchical diagram, you would outline something like this. Category 1, subcategory, subcategory. Category 2, subcategory, subcategory. Category 3, subcategory, subcategory. Category 4, subcategory, subcategory. The main categories are like a container for the subcategories. This is how you can group certain topics under the umbrella of one larger topic and keep your work organized. The subcategories are there to be more detailed explanations of parts of the main categories. For example, if you are writing a book on how to take care of your dog, you may choose to do a category of feeding with a subcategory of what nutrition your dog needs, with another subcategory of supplementing your dog's health. Once you've figured out your category groupings, you're ready to write. Keep in mind that none of this is necessarily set in stone. You can always make additions, changes, or revisions later on. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, most writers make a great deal of changes to their first drafts, sometimes even their 4th or 5th drafts. It all depends on whether the completed book reads well, flows well, makes sense, and feels right. Once you have the first draft of your book, leave it alone for a while. This could be a day or two, a week, and sometimes even a month of time before you go back and look at it with a fresh perspective. The reason for doing this is to make sure that your subconscious has time to let the information settle, and that you aren't completely burnt out on the topic when you move forward in your revision and editing process. Taking a step back on a project for a day or a week will allow you to rest your brain and your eyes and make sure your life gets a little variety before jumping back in. I know that for me personally, focusing on a single project for too many consecutive hours or days is very tedious and can make it feel like a chore instead of enjoyable. That's why I like changing it up a bit with each day. I focus on one project for an hour or two, move on to another, then go back or even work on a third project. This ensures that I don't get bored or find any one activity too tedious, and it also means that I enjoy my job every day. It's also a good idea to let a few friends, peers, or other writers read your work and get some feedback. Then you'll be able to go over it again with the reaction of others in mind and revise whatever catches your eye as well. Getting input from other people is also a good way to get another perspective on your writing and how you present information. which is also a good thing, no matter how good a writer you are. Think of it this way. Your revisions will be much more educated if you consider feedback from others. That brings us to the next section. Revision. Revising is a necessary part of the writing process. Think of the original draft as a practice run. Practice makes perfect. So every time you read through your book and make improvements, it gets better and better. Now, that doesn't mean you should go through it 50 times and make changes. Use your better judgment. Make the changes that make sense and improve the quality of the work. Don't make changes just for the sake of making changes. Not all writers agree with revision, nor do all works desperately need revising. It is, however, a good idea to go over your work with a fresh perspective and make changes where you feel they are necessary. An extremely useful tool for this process is the Track Changes feature in Microsoft Word. I use this feature constantly when I edit someone else's work, as well as my own work. It helps because you can go back and see exactly what was changed, when, and by whom if there are multiple editors. You can also leave comments directly in the document, making the entire process less tedious because you're not looking at two separate windows trying to figure out what page a change is on. Before I learned to use the Track Changes feature, I would go through a document and simply make a note of which page, paragraph, and line the change needed to be made on. This is definitely not an efficient way to go about editing. And as soon as I found the feature a few years ago, it was out with the old and in with the new. Work smarter, not harder, right? So, in case you haven't been made aware of this feature or just simply have never used it, let's take a look at some of the possibilities this feature offers and go through a crash course of the review pane in Word. First, look for the tab in your top menu of Word that says Review. Click on it to select the review pane and gain access to all of the document review options. As you can see, there are quite a few options for this tab that will allow you to use tools to streamline the revision process. We're going to focus on the Track Changes button, the comment options, the Accept, Reject, Previous, and Next buttons. First, let's check out the Track Changes button. Once you activate this setting, every change you make will be tracked and documented by the program. Whether you insert a comma, delete an extra character or letter, or even completely replace a whole part of a sentence, this feature will keep track of it so that you can see everything that's been changed throughout the entire document. It'll look something like this. The beginning of the line is marked whenever there is a change or correction present, and the revisions are marked with different color for each editor. In this example, it's red, but if you were to set up the document for someone else for their input, their changes would show up in a different color like pink, blue, or green. If you want to make additional changes in different colors, you can also select Change User Name from the drop-down menu of the Track Changes button. Now let's take a look at how comments work. This can be incredibly useful for revising because you may not want to make the change, know you want to change but don't know what it is yet, or simply want to insert something to think about during your next pass of editing or before you get another person's input. The way to do this is simple. Highlight a word, phrase, sentence, paragraph, or even a page that you want to comment on, and click the New Comment button. A box will appear in the same color as your edits do, and you can leave your comment in the bubble. Note that you have to manually delete comments once you're finished with them, as they don't count in the Accept or Reject revision. Comments can be used for just about anything. As someone who edits on a regular basis, I often find myself asking the writer questions, making suggestions, trying to clarify, or simply trying to reach a compromise on part of their work. This also means that the writer can give their input before changes are made, which is very important if you want to maintain a collaborative effort in your work. If you're editing your own work, it can allow you to make suggestions to yourself, get feedback from others, or simply make notes about something that doesn't quite feel right, might need to be changed, or seems off somehow. Above is our first corrected error. Notice that it's highlighted in blue, as if you had selected it with the mouse. This is the first error, and if you pressed Accept, it will update and the next error will be highlighted. If this process is too tedious for you, going through mistakes and corrections one at a time, there is a bulk option as well. It can be quite a task to edit a book. Even going through a manuscript once is pretty time-consuming, and oftentimes, after several hours of paying attention to minute details and meticulously going through one mistake after another, your eyes can start getting tired or playing tricks on you. If you know that the corrections that have been made are correct, why bother looking at them each one at a time again when you can simply click Accept All? Now that we've covered the technicalities of revision, let's go over the importance of it. The very first time you do something, it may or may not be perfect, or even as good as you'd like it to be. Maybe you bake a cake for the first time and it tastes fine, but it looks ridiculous. Maybe you try again and it looks much nicer, but it tastes weird. As writers, we're lucky. We don't have to start over from scratch. Sometimes that's the best course of action, but we don't necessarily have to take that course. Instead, we can work with what's already there and revise. We can rearrange chapters, rearrange sentences, take entire sections out of the book, add new sections or chapters, and make little technical corrections along the way. The main thing to remember is that the first draft is usually not the final draft, so some revising is generally a good thing. If you can get input from 2 to 4 other people, then why not do so? They may be able to point things out to you that you would normally miss. Finally, mistakes your spell checker won't notice. This is very important if you want your book to be professional, polished, and respected. Self-publishing gets a bad reputation a lot of times because of the poor quality of the writing, which happens when someone is working completely on their own and trying to crank out a professional book. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not going to happen. The book written by an individual writer with absolutely no feedback and no editing is likely going to be one that just isn't worthy of the market. Don't get me wrong, it still has a chance to sell some copies, but as soon as the reviews start rolling in and readers are more disappointed than not, it's time to consider hiring an editor or making more than a single revision pass over your work. Here are some of the most common mistakes that a spell checker will miss. Of course, most people know about the your and your dilemma, as well as it's, and there, and there. Spell checker doesn't always miss these, but it's very likely that it can. Then there are nonsensical sentences that a spell check program can miss, specific words especially. They can either have a double meaning or they can be spelled 2 different ways. Except. I like them all except for the brown one. Accept. I don't think anyone should ever accept failure. Effect. The effect of global warming is yet to be fully determined. Affect. Your love life simply doesn't affect me, so why do you insist on sharing the details? Pain. The rain is falling on the window pane. Pain. Heartache is a unique and internalized form of pain. More. Can I have more ice cream, please? More. The moor is a wasteland of undrained marsh. Bear. My favorite animal is a bear. Bare. The night air feels cold on my bare skin. Staring. I'm staring at the image, but I still can't figure out what it is. Starring. Have you seen the new movie starring Kiefer Sutherland? Lead. My eyelids felt like they were made of lead as I drifted off to sleep. Led. The officer was very humble even though he led everyone to safety. Compliment. Telling me I'm smart was a very nice compliment. Compliment. That scarf will surely complement the color of your eyes. Stationary. If you're in danger, it might be best to remain stationary. Stationary. The stationery she bought me was unique and nice to write on. As you can see, there are a great number of words like this. They look almost the same, usually sound the same, and have completely different meanings. Unfortunately, the only way to fully get a handle on the difference of these words and their spellings and meanings is to study them, read them, and use them over and over until you get it right. The examples listed above might help, but ultimately it is a learned skill. Just because you're a talented storyteller doesn't mean that your writing is good. Everyone needs some basic training in English and sentence structure, spelling, and grammar. If you want to be a good writer and release professional, respectable work, then making sure your language is correct, or at least mostly correct, is a pretty good idea. When writers go through traditional publishing houses, they have editors assigned to them. For a decent publishing house, the editor will work with the writer to ensure the quality and accuracy of the manuscript before publication. This is one of the vital processes that make a book publisher quality versus low quality. On that note, let's check out the editing process. Editing. Most people think of editing and proofreading as being the same thing. That couldn't be further from the truth. While a proofreader will go through someone's work and make technical corrections to the work, an editor will go through a work, make suggestions, ask questions, restructure sentences to make more sense, and essentially collaborate with the writer to develop the work and to get it to its full potential. My recommendation is you give your work to a friend or three to look over and get some feedback from them. Though this should be done preferably by someone with good written language skills, it can also be done by someone who is an avid reader or does a lot of work over the internet in writing. What makes a piece of writing good is when the audience can connect with it. This is one of the most versatile forms of communication because words can express everything imaginable with the proper combinations. Writing shouldn't just be to communicate a point, though. It should be informative and somewhat entertaining to keep the reader's attention. Otherwise, you have a reader with a wandering mind who doesn't understand what they're trying to read. And who are your readers? Every work has a target audience. Though this is where a little marketing knowledge can go a long way, as well as a little sharing and asking for appropriate input. For example, if you wrote a book on pets, you wouldn't ask a stockbroker to give you feedback unless he or she has considerable knowledge on pets and pet care, right? Someone from your target audience is best. And for feedback purposes, someone with some knowledge on the subject is better. Now let's cover why editing is important, especially for an independent author. There's absolutely nothing that screams, "I'm not a professional," more loudly than poorly written work. If you're going to call yourself a writer and get published by a major traditional publisher, then sure, make a few mistakes, have some errors in your manuscript. The publisher has editors on their staff that will work with you. They will catch things that you probably won't, especially if you've fallen into some bad habit traps over the years. If you're on your own, independently publishing your work, then you have to play all the roles required: writer, editor, cover designer, marketing specialist, PR writer, blog tour scheduler, manager, agent, everything. Now, not all of these are required to independently publish a book. Just a few are the basic necessities, so you may want to familiarize yourself with the duties of each role. Editing is a necessity. If you throw raw and unrefined work into your book and publish it just so you can say you've published a book, it will show to readers, reviewers, and other writers alike. People will be able to tell that the effort put into finalizing the work was not as much as it could have been, and your respect as an indie author flies out the window, along with that first book. Believe me, I've published and unpublished a work of my own that was not up to par, and have been working to correct that error ever since. Your own revisions will only get you so far. Remember that everyone perceives things differently, and just because your own writing makes sense to you doesn't mean that it will make as much sense to someone outside of your head. That's why writers form groups and have workshops, to get input from other writers on their work, get an idea of what the consensus is on their work, and figure out what could be improved upon or taken out completely. I highly recommend getting input from at least one other person. Oftentimes, this can be done for free by an instructor or friend who happens to have some knowledge of your topic and the written word. Unless you have absolutely perfect spelling and grammar, a perfect writing style, and never make mistakes, I recommend that you seek out another intellectual and knowledgeable person to give you some input on your work. If you think your writing is perfect and that you never make mistakes, then you're clearly delusional. No offense, but no one is perfect. Ever. Finalizing. Finalizing your work for publication isn't a difficult process. You've already revised, you've had someone comment and give you feedback, you've made corrections and additions, and gotten your manuscript as close to perfect as you possibly can. Finalizing your manuscript consists of several things. First, for the printed version, you will have to determine what size you want your book to be, as well as whether you want it to be hardcover or paperback. Be careful what size you choose. If you use CreateSpace, which is the most effective and wallet-friendly way to get your book available on Amazon and to other online retailers, then you can choose from the following sizes: 5 by 8 inches, 5.06 by 7.81 inches, 5.25 by 8 inches, 5.5 by 8.5 inches, 6 by 9 inches, 6.14 by 9.21 inches, 6.69 by 9.61 inches, 7 by 10 inches, 7.44 by 9.69 inches, 7.5 by 9.25 inches, 8 by 10 inches, 8.5 by 11 inches. These are for black and white print and have the option of white or cream-colored paper depending on your personal preference. I have to warn you, though, the cream-colored paper looks a little dingy, so I have always used the white paper. Cream coloring makes the pages look old and worn, so unless you are purposely seeking out that effect, I would recommend using white interior pages. They're clean, crisp, and look wonderful. If you want to do color printing on the interior, then there are some industry standard sizes you can use as well. 5.5 by 8.5 inches, 6 by 9 inches, 6.14 by 9.21 inches, 7 by 10 inches, 8 by 10 inches, 8.5 by 8.5 inches, 8.5 by 11 inches. There are more size options for both color and black and white printing, but many of these are not eligible for the expanded distribution, which includes online retailers and stores. If you only want to sell your books through Amazon and aren't worried about the other distributors, then you could go as far as creating your own size for printing. Once you've determined the size of your book, it's time to resize your Word document and reformat it to look right in that size. For the sake of this example, let's use my favorite trim size, which is the 6 by 9 inches. This trim size is referred to commonly as trade paperback. I've found that this size of a book isn't too large or awkward to hold, has a comfortable feel to it, and is ideal for paperback versions. When you're ready to resize your document, go to your Page Layout tab in Word and click on it to open the Control pane. You can now see all of the different controls you need to resize your document to the appropriate size. If you don't resize your document, it will stay in its 8.5 by 11-inch default setting, and whatever size your book will be printed will be how much of the page is actually printed. Essentially, if you choose 6 by 9 for your print size and don't resize your document, you'll have 6 by 9 of your page show up, and the rest will run off of the edge of the paper. That definitely isn't very professional. If you click on the down arrow next to Size, this menu will come up. If your size doesn't show up in the main menu, go ahead and click on the More Paper Sizes option. 6 by 9 never pops up on the main options, so we'll go into the More Sizes menu and enter our custom size. The 6 by 9 trade paperback size is an industry standard and works across platforms. Namely, it is supported by Lulu and CreateSpace alike, which makes the process of getting your work out there simpler and easier to accomplish. If you want the smaller paperback size that most books come in, you can choose that as well because it also works across platforms. That size is referred to as A5 and is approximately 5.83 by 8.26 inches. To make sure your book will be printable through both avenues, if you choose to use them, use a trim size that is available on all self-publishing sites, the most important being CreateSpace. The reason why I like to use a cross-platform method is because I own my own block of ISBNs, and a single barcode issued by Boker costs $10. If I want to get my hands on a free auto-generated barcode to stick on the back of my book, I publish on Lulu.com, and they give me a PDF image of the barcode. A simple screenshot, crop, and a cut-paste operation in Photoshop later, I can add my price to the barcode, have a professional-looking back cover, and save myself $10. Now don't get me wrong, you don't have to buy your own ISBNs. You can use one that is issued by CreateSpace or Lulu and have them listed as the official publisher. If you're only publishing your own books and don't want to have your own indie publishing company name, then this is the simplest way to go about it, hassle-free. Back to the paper sizes. Once you have resized your document to 6 by 9 in the Options window, you have to adjust the margins from their default of 1 inch to a little smaller so the margins don't dominate the book. I usually adjust the margins to about 0.7 inch each, which balances the layout. The small image of the paper with the lines on the bottom left of your pop-up menu will give you an idea of how the paper will balance out, including margins. As you can see from the paper window, the margins look a little large for a book, so tab over to the Margins tab and make your changes there. The reason I use 0.7 inches and not less is because you have to make sure that there's enough space to allow for errors. When paper is running through a printer at high speeds, There is a natural tendency for some errors to occur. You don't want the margins to be too small, but you also don't want them to be too big. If they're at 0.7 inch, then they could go down to 0.5 inch without any chance of the words being cut off. Once you've changed these settings, the page numbers will also change, and so will the way things are spaced out in your document. The formatting will seem off because you just decreased the page size throughout the entire document, which then needs to be corrected for print purposes, especially if your book contains images. Though it may seem tedious at first, the only thing you really need to do is reposition your text where you want it as far as headlines and such go. Chapter beginnings usually mean a new page. If you're really particular, then they mean a new odd-numbered page. Since all of the revising and editing has already been done, all that's left is repositioning the chapter beginnings the way you want them to appear. Remember, odd pages are on the right and even pages are on the left. When you go through your manuscript and fix these formatting issues, you can also go ahead and add headers and footers to your document. Including page numbers, your book's title, or your author name is the norm for headers and footers. I generally use the footer for page numbers and the header for the author name. You can also do different odd and even pages. One of my important suggestions is to change the text color to gray for the headers and footers so they don't get mixed up with the other text on the page once the Word document is converted to a print-ready PDF. Though the header and footer sections appear lighter in Word already, they often appear as black once the file is converted into a PDF.